Have you ever wondered why you may be dealing with recurrent yeast infections on a much deeper level? I'm talking emotionally, metaphysically, spiritually. Well, let's go ahead and dive in because I think it's super important that we understand the energetics behind yeast. Let's go ahead and dive in and understand more of what does yeast symbolize. First, it's going to be loss of boundaries. When you think of yeast, it's a very invasive type of microorganism. It really takes over. You got so much fermentation going on that it just multiplies and grows just like crazy. It's just like this rage party. So it can often symbolize kind of this inability to create boundaries when it comes to our emotions, or even just feeling that you are being invaded by external forces? Do you feel like there's a lot of energy outside of you constantly seeping in? Rather, it's on social media, it's in the workplace, it's a lot of busy noise. You just kind of feel this sense of overwhelming energy kind of take over you from outside sources. Yeast can represent emotional stagnation. Are you stuck in an emotion? Are you stagnant with your emotions? Are you processing your emotions, or are you kind of sweeping it under the rug? Are you kind of keeping it in a dark place and not bringing it up to light and looking at what the emotions are telling you, what's coming up for you? Or are you just kind of shying away from it and hoping that it will just go away if you don't look at it? And typically the emotions that can come up that are not necessarily processed or that we go through all the way are going to be things like shame or embarrassment or guilt, things that are hard to look at. You know what I mean? Like when we look at these types of emotions, they require for us to look deeper into ourselves. Other emotions like sadness or anger, we can typically process them pretty well, or maybe we process them a little bit depending on the severity of the topic or context of why we're feeling that emotion. I don't know about you, but I don't really see a lot of information or help or guidance or even just kind of this encouragement to say, let's really dive in and look at your shame. Let's look at your guilt. Let's look at why you feel embarrassed. Let's look at why you don't feel good enough. No, it's such an uncomfortable emotion to feel regardless, or things like jealousy or envy. These type of shadow types of emotions are really hard to look at, yet we process them all the way. When we think of guilt, this is typically either coming from an imposed feeling of someone trying to make us feel guilty, from manipulation from their end. If that's the case, all right, we know we need to set some better boundaries with that. If we're feeling guilt in the sense that we know we did something that was not in the best interest of others or even for ourselves, we know we did wrong and we just really feel bad or guilty about it, that's just your moral compass helping you to recognize, hey, that was out of character for us. That was not something that is really a part of our identity as far as who we feel we are morally. Let's make peace with it. Let's make amends. Let's own up to it. Let's take accountability. Let's shift that energy and correct it. Let's get back to who we truly are. That's what guilt is showing you. When we are experiencing shame, why? Right? We feel ashamed. Don't look at me. I'm embarrassed. I don't feel good enough. So I know even in the space of where I'm in when it comes to feminine wellness, there's a lot of shame around the feminine body, the design of the feminine body, cycles and hormones and all of that. There's a lot of shame that just reeks in this area. There's this fear of imperfection. There's this fear of being dirty or whatever the case may be, but it really is coming from this lack of understanding of who we really are. So you're going to run into shame the more you try to learn those deeper, darker, shadowy sides of yourself that have always been punished for exploring or expressing. So now that we have a little bit more understanding about guilt or shame that we typically would not process, that can also be symbolizing stagnant emotion when it comes to yeast. And then last but not least is going to be overindulgence. Where in our life are we experiencing disharmony? If you notice that you typically crave sugar or that comfort food after a particular argument, maybe it's relating to your relationships, maybe it's work, maybe it's whatever it is, that uses a lot of energy to experience those feelings and those emotions. And your body uses glucose and sugar for energy. So we can tend to overindulge to compensate for the thing that we are lacking. It's kind of like this cheaper way of getting the comfort, the soothing, the feeling of safety, the feeling of pleasure that we're not getting from the thing we want to get it from in the space of food or drinks or desserts. So symbolically, that could be some representation of candida and yeast from a metaphysical sense. Let's break down the different cycle phases and what that could be telling you if you deal with recurrent yeast infection in a particular phase. Now, when it comes to the menstrual phase, this is the time for renewal. The body is literally renewing itself. Things are being released during this time. So if you recognize that, these yeast infections keep coming up during the menstrual phase, this can also point to that resistance of releasing some of those stagnant emotions we could be holding on to. We can be holding on to the things that we no longer need during this time. So this is really an important time to just allow for things to be released. So if we recognize that yeast infections start to come up during the follicular phase, which is the phase right after your menstrual phase, then that can symbolize that we could be holding on to the old ways of doing things. We're not fully embracing this new beginning or this fresh start or this fresh outlook on life. We're holding on to the old past illusions that no longer serve us. Now, if we notice that we may deal with it more during the ovulation time, ovulation is a time for creativity, for fertility, for manifestation. And when you think about it, this is the time when the egg is being released, it's put in position to be fertilized. So if you notice that you are dealing with more yeast infections during the time of ovulation, this can highlight a fear of vulnerability, a fear of being on display, a fear of being seen, a fear of creating new projects, a fear of really putting yourself out there. And then when it comes to the luteal phase, I think a lot of us have gotten accustomed to luteal phase in its imbalanced state whenever our hormones are out of balance, but in its natural state, the luteal phase is the time of nurturing energy. We are developing and producing pregnancy hormones during this time. So this is really a time to nurture yourself, to reflect within yourself, to look deeper within yourself. And so if we are noticing that yeast starts to come up more frequently during this phase, which can be up to 2 weeks, this can also symbolize maybe we're resisting nurturing ourselves. Maybe we're resisting taking the very best care of ourselves, mothering ourselves, loving ourselves. But also if we're just resisting from going within. So of course, we want to be mindful of, yes, the physical reasons, making sure that our diet is up to par, we're taking care of our bodies, but looking a little bit deeper emotionally of what's driving the physical actions that we may be taking. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and thank yourself so much for showing up today, and thank you for tuning in to Divine Feminine Wellness.